A property manager, and a good property manager specifically, is so important to make your deal succeed. I would say it's the number one thing that makes real estate deals succeed or fail is how good the property manager is. And so, what really separates a good property manager from a bad property manager, and how do you find a good one? What are the things you should look for? How does that actually work within a deal? We're going to jump into that in this video. And so I'm going to get into it in 3 easy steps. We got a great quote for you. Stick around. I think you're going to like it. All right, so as we jump in here, we're going to talk specifically about multifamily properties. So we're not necessarily talking about single family. A lot of these principles do apply to single family, but because we work in multifamily and we have 150 million in multifamily real estate, we're going to primarily talk about that, about how you find a good property manager, what to look for, and how that works inside of a deal. So the first thing, number one, is a property manager's job is to execute your business plan. I'm going to say that again. A property manager's job is to execute your business plan. So for us, we do a lot of what's called value add apartment investing. So what that means is we'll come into an older property. We call them B and C class, or kind of older properties that are maybe 30 years old or so. And we'll come in and we'll do renovations on the common areas or specific units, and we'll basically see that we can increase rents as people move out, the next people moving in, we can see that, we'll have raised rents a couple $100s, and that will dramatically increase the value of the property. So a common way this looks is we'll come into an older place, we'll see that, if we put in new countertops, we do some work on the floors, we paint the place, we do some work in the bathroom, maybe we'll spend $10,000 per unit, right? And then if we can see that $200 a month rent increase, then we will have dramatically increased the value of the property. So that's kind of what we're trying to do on this. It kind of becomes more of like a long-term flip, right? We're not just flipping it to turn it around, but it takes time to be able to do this work. And over time, maybe you hold it for 3 to 5 or 6 years. It'll allow you to really dramatically increase the value of that property. So again, it doesn't matter how good the plan looks on paper. And this is where a lot of people go wrong, is they think, this is awesome. I'm going to come in and I'm going to do all this, and it's going to function amazing. And it doesn't always go that way. In the cases where we've had deals that have not gone as well as we would have hoped, it's been typically due to a property management issue, that they have not been able to perform in the way they thought they were going to be able to perform. Maybe they weren't able to lease units up as quickly as they thought. Maybe they weren't able to do the construction as quickly as they thought they were going to. Maybe there were certain things that they neglected as they worked on this. They couldn't do this over here. So, or maybe they had trouble staffing. I mean, I have other videos that talk about, some specific things that have happened with property management. There's lots of stories, but you learn. And so, but a good property manager will be able to execute on the plan. They'll be able to take it. They'll be able to run with it. You won't necessarily have to do a lot of work supervising them, because they're really good. They're really sharp. They're in that market. They know what things cost. They're not overspending, and they're really doing a great job. So the question comes down is, how do you find a good property manager, right? If this is the number one thing, how do you find it? We're going to jump into that right now. All right, so this is step number 2. How do you find a good property manager, right? They don't really grow on trees. You can't just find them wherever. How do you find a good property manager? If this is the number one factor, it's that important. So it's important we figure out how you find one. Well, the first thing you can do when you're looking at properties, or you see different comp properties, when you're buying an apartment building, typically what we look for other properties that are similar to the property that we're looking at, right? So that's how we know what rents should be. We look at other properties. So, another great way is when you're at those properties, you can figure out who is the property manager for this property. Who is the group that's running that one? And if you like the way it's run, it's important to look at and see that. So that's a great way to kind of find other folks, look at comp properties. Another way is you're typically working through a broker when you're buying an apartment building. So ask the broker, hey, who does a good job here in town? What's the name of a good property manager? If you know a couple, maybe a few, I'm looking to interview and try to figure out who would be a good fit for us. So it's really important that you do that, you ask around, you're able to kind of find out who would be a good fit for you. Another thing that's really important is when you actually are talking with property managers, and it's great to be able to set up a meeting. We'll typically do a sit down and we'll say, hey, let's have a meeting. And we want to ask great questions. And some of the just initial questions that you want to ask, there's whole sheets of information about this, but just, what type of property do you manage? There are property managers that only manage single family houses. You can imagine that might not be the best fit for multifamily, right? If they're only doing houses, then doing multifamily may not be a good fit. Now, if they manage a 3-unit property and they manage 10 units, Well, if you're trying to do a 300 unit property, that may not be the best fit for them. So you want to kind of get a breakdown of what they manage, where they manage, how they manage, what areas. So how many units total do they manage? We typically will work with groups that manage at least a couple thousand units, just so that when they manage our building with 200 units, they have some scale, they have some experience. If they only have 200 units they manage and we're adding 200 more, that's a lot for them to try to figure out versus adding just a little bit more. So that's something that's really important to look at. Which markets are they in? If they're only in markets that are 2 or 3 hours away, and maybe you've had a good experience with them there, I would say it could be really challenging to bring them to a new market if you're in that new market. And I had a horror stories video that I did, or kind of some stuff where we did that. We brought somebody from another market, and it didn't work out as well. I've heard other people, they've had good experience with that. It's something that I've decided in general, we will not do that, just because there's a lot of unknowns. They may not be able to find vendors or staff in the new area. The things that they take for granted in their old area, it may not necessarily work, and it may not necessarily be their fault. It's just you really want to try to set people up for success, and you really want to make sure the deal performs well. So what we try to do is try to remove all the mystery, all the things that could go wrong, and just take really what's the surest way we can have a property manager really fulfill this business plan. It's to make sure the property manager has experience in that market. Another thing is, what is the reputation of the property manager? If ever we ask around, people say, oh, those guys are jerks, they're terrible, they don't really follow through, or they had this, but then they lost this particular property because now this other group is managing it. You want to pay attention to that. And that's also coming, whether it's from other property managers, which they have an incentive to talk negatively about other groups, but brokers will share sometimes, or even other investors. Sometimes you can get referrals from a property manager to existing clients saying, hey, let's have you talk to these guys. Are they happy with the way these properties have performed? So again, it's really good to make sure you get good people in there, because if you don't have good people, if you don't have a good property management group, the property is typically not going to perform well. So really important to look at. And then also, what are some success stories that this property manager has had? Just as we're multifamily operators, we need to have success stories when we go to our investors saying, hey, look at these great things that have happened as we've taken over properties and we've done things that are well. We've increased investor returns way more than we thought. We've refinanced and returned all this capital. Well, property managers should have similar track records where they can point to and say, hey, we came in here, we increased revenue by X amount, we turned this property around in this amount of time, this is the way it was before, here's before and after pictures. All that stuff is really powerful, and they should have some information like that as well. And then the last thing really, and there's many more than this, but this is the last thing I thought of off the top of my head, was really what lessons have they learned? Again, if you ever are working with property manager or even a partner or a sponsor in a deal, and hey, what's gone wrong? And you ask them that question, hey, what's gone wrong? Or what's some things that you learned along the way? If they ever are have a blank stare, or they ever say hey, everything's kind of gone fine, or we've, whatever, I might say well, maybe this group is inexperienced, because things are always going to go wrong in every single deal. There's always going to be things you're like, what? We learned this in the way this operates. Now, as you get, you do it longer, you hopefully avoid things, you kind of come to expect that things in every single area are not going to go phenomenally well. I mean, hopefully some things will go better in certain areas, maybe certain areas they'll go as planned, and maybe a couple things they won't go quite as well, but it will all kind of balance out to be okay. But lessons learned in this business, it's so important, because mistakes and things will happen, or just life happens, and things don't always go the way that they plan to go. So again, really looking for specific information from property managers and things that they learn along the way. So now we're going to talk about things to watch out for. Okay, so this is the third step of what are some things to watch out for, right? Because there's always going to be red flags that come up. That's why we try to catch things early. And the more you do something, whether you're in a certain business or you work with certain types of individuals, there's things that come up where you're like, I have a little flag that goes up and I need to watch for this. So they can be kind of shortcuts as we're looking to get where we want to go in life, in business, in real estate. And so it's important we pay attention. And it's been said that a wise man learns from their own mistakes, but a genius will learn from the mistakes of others. So hopefully you can learn from some of my mistakes here as well. So things to watch out for, like I mentioned, the whole, a property manager in a new market. And we had this issue in a property in Little Rock, Arkansas, where we brought somebody from a different market, and they did not have the contacts, they didn't have the network to be able to make it happen. And we had some issues with that property. That was something that we learned along the way. So again, that kind of brings us to the next thing, is if whether it's an investment group that you're investing with, or it's an investment partner, or it's a property manager, if somebody doesn't have stories that they can say, when you ask, hey, what hasn't gone well in a particular deal, if they don't kind of look back and say, oh, well, how much time do you have? That kind of thing. I want to tell you different stories about things that have happened, because people think sometimes these are very, finely tuned, everything's a science. It's continual. You're kind of tweaking things to make them, it's almost like you're optimizing, right? If you're an athlete, and like I do competitive Spartan racing, right? So that's some of my medals in the last shot here. And, I do that, and I realize like what I eat and when I eat and how I eat, I keep changing that to be able to get better performance, right? And I train in different ways to try to really optimize and get better and better. And it's the same way with this, is that you should be continually learning and tweaking and growing. So with property management, it's the same type of thing. So if a certain, sort of management software system didn't work, maybe we should try a different one. If we tried a certain approach with tenants, maybe we should kind of go a different way. A lot of property management too is kind of stuck in the 1960s. It's not very high tech. So if someone is bringing tech, there's a lot of property tech stuff that's coming available now where, instead of having somebody that has to be there for an appointment, a lot of places, depending on where the property is in the tenant mix, you can actually go online to apartments.com. You can get a code that's good for 24 hours, and you can actually go tour a property by punching in on the keys on the code as far as how you would get into that property to be able to tour it. Now, again, it has to fit the property and the location, that kind of thing. But I'm just saying there are different innovative things that can be done. So property managers should be continually looking at that kind of stuff, saying, what can we do to increase performance, to make ourselves and this particular property more attractive. So there should be stories there that kind of help reinforce that. You want to watch out for inexperience, just a group that just does not have experience either in the market or just doesn't have enough experience at all. I mean, ideally, if you're a property manager and whoever the major property, you kind of got the global property management company, and then you'll have like a regional person, and then you'll have a person in your property that's typically dedicated to your property if it's 100 units or more, or maybe 80 units or more. So they'll be on site. So you want, especially the person on site, to be very, very experienced. If the regional has a lot of experience, they can provide more support as well. But again, it's just really making sure that somebody knows what's going on, has done that type of project before, has the support they need from their, other property management kind of group, so they can kind of get the staff that they need and get help when they need help, because these are really big projects. So inexperience is something we watch out for. And then we see, if you ask for referrals and somebody has no referrals, or you call them and they give bad feedback. So that's the thing, if you give referrals and they're giving bad feedback, that's not good, right? Because they're saying, hey, I use these groups, I don't think I'd use them again. And that stuff happens. So that's why it is important to check in with referrals. Referrals typically will give good feedback, but it's something to say, even when you ask referrals of, hey, well, tell me what's something that didn't go well in a property. How did they respond when, you had a problem? Were they responsive to your feedback? Were they more defensive when you asked for help? So again, this is your property if you're the owner, or if you're an investor, or if you're a syndicator who's running a deal. It's really your property. So it's making sure that this person or this group can manage it in such a way to achieve that business plan. So I hope that you achieve all your goals, everything you're looking for. You find the best property manager for your property, or maybe you have multiple properties out there. But I just want to give a little bit of insight of what we look for with property managers that we do. So I wanted to share this quote real quick, and it comes from John Maxwell. And he says this, he says, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think, that can sound really intense, like everything rises and falls on leadership. But in the answer, I think it really is true that everything rises and falls on leadership. If you have good leadership in a country, the country will do well. If you have bad leadership, the country won't do as well. It's the same with a multifamily property. If you have good leadership, it will go much, much, much better than if you have really poor leadership. So it's something to kind of ponder and think about. I want to share this video with you, which talks about my worst investing mistakes. I kind of referenced one of them in this video, but you'll want to check that out. There's some things that I learned along the way that you can kind of learn from me on that. But I wanted to hear from you in the comments. What's been your experience with property managers? Have you had a good experience or bad experience? Please share those stories below. It will really help our community. And thanks for taking the time to educate yourself. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.